Well, hello and welcome to my cellar one more time. It's going to be a short one tonight, I think. Hardly any comments after the last one. A lot of birthday wishes, for which I say thank you to one and all. So, I decided I was going to talk about a couple of things I want to talk about that we've been talking about. Okay, Tim, this isn't one of them. You mentioned that you and Gary had, at least in the early days of Strategic Review and Dragon, viewed the success of the industry as being a benefit to TSR since it served to grow the fledgling RPG hobby, and that this was at least one reason your editorship was marked by the philosophy and practice of magazines not publishing only articles on TSR games, but all games, and remarkably even those of direct competitors. On that note, what was your impression of, and what was your impression of Gary and TSR's impression of the more prominent competitors of TSR, such as Chaosium with RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu, GDW with Traveler, or say Fugu, Fantasy Games Unlimited, FGU with Bushido? Okay, good question. We didn't feel that the rising tide was only going to lift RPGs. We felt correctly, as it turned out, that tide was going to bring up boards and as well as minis, which it did. Lots of board games came out during that period of time, some fantasy, some not, and a lot of minis came out, including the first ever fantasies and companies that didn't exist before that period of time. Case in point, look at Ralph Partha. They came to Gen Con in '76 and put the miniatures industry on notice that there was a new player in town that could blow their socks off, had blown their socks off with their amount of detail, their knack for fantasy, etc. But as to the other companies, we had a lot of respect for Chaosium, and their RuneQuest game was a very well developed, very fleshed out world that they played in, and as such, we knew that it would draw its fans, but that those fans, while they may channel off into that side stream of role-playing, we figured some of them would still probably hang out in the main channel anyway. Had a lot of respect for Greg and Tadashi, a lot of respect for their problem. The Cthulhu game was pretty well done, particularly given the time period that it was created in. I don't mean any disrespect to Mark Miller or to GDW, but I gotta admit, we had a hard time grasping the appeal of a game that you could spend 15 or 20 minutes creating a character only to find out that, oops, too bad he died before he got into the academy. We did know that Star Wars was going to provide a big boost, and it did, to all things sci-fi. And that was Brian's first comment coming out of the movie that afternoon as well. This is going to be a shot in the arm for Traveler. We held a great deal, Gary particularly, and I did also. Gary had known him longer, had a great deal of respect for the guys at GDW. Great deal of respect, and I believe the feeling was pretty mutual at the time. Fugu, well, it wouldn't be telling tales out of turn to say that we didn't really worry about Fantasy Games Unlimited being any kind of competition to us. Bushido, while it was a very interesting set of rules, was a very narrow focus of interest, and was really hard to get deeply into without a fair grounding in Japanese history and Japanese study of Japanese culture. Whereas generic role-playing D&D, everybody could touch on a Western European or Northern European mythos. It was much harder to tap into an Asian mythos that so few of us knew so little about. And the guy that was running the company was kind of a loose cannon anyway, and so at least while I was there, I don't believe we ever viewed him as a threat. But yeah, we believe that if people got excited about gaming, there was plenty of excitement to go around for role players, for board gamers, for minis, and it was true. I'm not breaking my arm, patting myself on my back, or patting Gary on his. We had a pretty good idea of what we were doing, and it proved out that we knew what we were doing. And again, it was a synergy of so many things coming together at that period of time. Cultural influences and literature influences and comic book influences. It was a good time. Okay, next question. Please tell me what your basic method for statting monsters and NPCs is. I've decided that maggots falling from the roof space would be a good, if freaky, random monster encounter, but I'm wondering how to stat them. These would be giant maggots about the size of a pit bull terrier and with an attack dog demeanor, but still plenty squishy and yuck. What method do you advise for gauging their stats, and how do you work that out? Thanks for your channel. It's like vitamin C for the brain. Well, thank you for that. Well, number one, a maggot the size of a pit bull falling from the ceiling will burst. A maggot is a temporary stage in the transition from egg to full-grown bug. So I would think maggots might be a bad choice, particularly that big. They're just going to go off like water balloons. Now, yeah, that's yucky, but where's the threat? But when it comes to statting, I don't have a rule of thumb. I have several. How large is it? Okay, how large it is how much meat there is in total. You know, an elephant's got a lot more meat than a water buffalo. Both are formidable foes, but I'd give an elephant several more hit dice than I'd give the water buffalo. Mass is one thing. Speed is another. Because it's, you know, how hard are they to hit? An elephant is much slower than a buffalo to, you know, get out of the way. For instance, to move its head aside from a swipe aimed at it by something large enough to threaten it. I look at, again, if we're talking about monsters that have no real basis in fact, but I look at monsters that are created and assign them a phylum and a class, and in terms of general body size and musculature and whatever, a lot of hit dice for something that's hard to hit, because you're not chopping out meat. But then you can also you can fudge on the side of armor class to make them harder to hit, without a lot of, for instance, a big snake, fighting it with a big axe. Okay? In real life, you only got to catch that snake once, chop. In D&D, a big snake isn't as fast as a little snake. You take this into account. Speed of the animal or the monster has a lot to do with its armor class, because armor class is just a rating. How hard is it to hit? Not necessarily what is it wearing, what is it clad in, how thick is its skin or scales or scoots or whatever. This is all a juggle. Strength. That usually I stat as a function of size. Though sometimes it's fun to give something small out of proportion strength, just for the surprise factor. How hard is it to kill? Well, that's a function of how fast is it, how meaty is it. Okay, you can hit it a lot. It's easy to hit, but it's got 180 hit points. So you're going to have to hit it a lot. But if you were trying to take down something the size of a hippopotamus with knives no longer than 5-inch blades, you'd have to stab it a lot of times before you could expect for it to roll over and die on you. When I'm making up monsters for a encounter in a campaign, I also take, especially when it comes to how many, I take into account the total number of the party's hit dice. That's my basis that I work on. If it's going to be an even encounter, they're going to have roughly the same or fewer. And depending upon how hard the encounter could be, how dangerous they are, how much of a threat they pose, how hard they are to kill, then they'll have more. Maybe twice as many, maybe 3 times as many. Too many players today do not remember the first rule of RPGing and dungeon murder hoboing, etc., and that was run away, live to fight another day. Did we run away a lot? You bet your butts we ran away a lot. If nothing else, you run away and you plot out a scheme to go back and a plan of attack. But you don't go, oh hell, let's just fight this great big huge enormous thing, and when you're at a disadvantage. Run away, live to fight another day. There's no shame in backing off and a strategic retreat when faced with superior odds, surprise, figure it out, go on back. It's the going back part that counts, not the strategic retreat to keep from getting roasted or toasted or minced or diced or however drained, whatever. Live to fight another day. That's, anyway, I diverge from my topic. It's an oxymoron to say apply common sense to fantasy, but it doesn't hurt. Let's face it, if dragons were real and merely this half the size of an Allosaurus, man, you got a lot of poking and hitting and killing, unless you can get into critical hits. Now, let's talk about critical hits for a minute. There was a thread on Facebook making the statement that critical hits were one of the worst things that happened to the game. And I agree to a great degree. However, critical hits or something very much like them, have always been around since the game started being played. There was just something magical and special about rolling a nat 20. And so, the idea of something special happening, now whatever it was, roll an extra d4, roll an extra d6, double it, whatever. The rolling of the nat 20 was always something special. Now, however, critical this, critical that, it seems to me that the players want to be able to make critical hits on the monsters, but they scream bloody murder when the monsters make critical hits on them. The whole concept of critical hits flies in the face of the whole concept of hit points in the original concept. And that was the ability to escape. How great was your ability to escape a killing blow? And so now critical hits come in and they get particular and it messes it up. Worse yet is fumbles. And I'm not sure which game or which edition brought in fumbles, but they suck. Now, again, back in the day, I know I sound like a hoary old graybeard. Back in the day, when you rolled a 1, it was usually just a laugh and something minor. Oh, yeah, you got splattered with monkey poop or, whatever. It wasn't something that you cut your own hamstring off and crippled yourself. Yeah, you might have dropped the ceramic whatever and broken it, and oh shit, there went the potion you were going after. But it wasn't the catastrophic result that it can be today. Let's see what else. Oh, got a Kickstarter coming out real soon. It's either World of Game Design or Old Guard Games. I'm not sure which. Go to Kickstarter and look for Curse of the Weaver Queen. What they're doing right now is, I believe they're taking subscriptions, which means, as it was explained to me, they're finding out how many people would be interested if it came out. And when they get enough people that are interested when they come out, they're going to launch. Great. Super. Can't wait for it to come out. I'll be sure and let you know. I'll be sure and post links, etc. It is Curse of the Weaver Queen ×2, in that I took the second follow-up adventure that I'd written and spun it into this one. And so now there's all kinds of travel you could do between the temples and things like this. It's being done now for DCC and 5e because those are the ones that sell the units. However, it has inside the book a QRL code that will enable you to download specialized conversion rules to play just about any game, any edition. That's the way it's been explained to me. I don't pretend to understand exactly what all is, but it is written in it's a generic form so that it can be modified. And anyway, that's what's going on there. Watch for it, and let them know if you're interested. All right, let's see what else. I'm still planning to go to Game Hole or Total Confusion in February out east, and GaryCon and Lake Geneva in March. That's still on the agenda, and it looks as though I'll probably be going to Texas in June. Now, because I have free time, because you didn't send me any comments, let's talk about some philosophical topics, shall we? And I've got two down here that are interrelated. I remember I told you a couple weeks ago about this really interesting anthropomorphic role-playing game from New Zealand called Duck Quest. And I told the guy that wrote it, as written, it'll never be popular here, except as a brief novelty, because it requires the players to have absolute trust in their DM. And everything I see, all the quibbles on the various threads on Facebook and some in the various podcasts and whatever, there just is not any trust. Everybody wants to argue that it should have had one more hit point or one less hit point, or it should have been worth 10 more experience points. Nobody can join a game and say, okay, let's play, entertain me, I'll try to entertain you, and we'll all have fun together. No, it's, this is what I'm due. This is what I did. What do you mean? Why aren't you rolling out in front of everybody? That's not what the book says. There is no trust. Now, in the very beginning, the players had no choice because there were so few sets of rules. And once the first edition was printed and promulgated and propagated and distributed, the erosion started. We had rules lawyers, and rules lawyers wanted to argue you can do this and you can do that. And so today everything is us versus the DM. I was going to say him, but I don't want to be sexist. It's either or. The players, the DM, GM, SM, whatever, shipmaster, game master, dungeon master, whatever, lore teller, whatever you call it. We don't just sit down and say, okay, good, what's going to happen? And you do it, and what benefit does that for me? Okay, thank you very much. No, we got to, no. The book says I should have gotten 740 experience points, and you only gave me 670. Why was that? Well, you want to be horrified. I, for one, and many others I know, back in the old days, we used to hand out experience points in handfuls. Ignored most of what was in the original books. All that thing about dividing them up and ranking, you're fifth level, so you get more than the first. Nah, bullshit. Everybody, here you go. Everybody gets so much. And then there would be special awards for special actions or very perceptive responses or what have you. I'm really saddened when I see I'm really saddened to see the erosion of trust and the fact that it's no longer we're all in this together. It's more like we're here to contest with you. We being plural. And anyway. Now, let's talk about what the topic is that's been fascinating us for the last, must be 3 episodes. That's alignment. Do we even need alignments? Alignment was created to be the fences to keep the herd from running amok. To give guidance to people that had no concept of what was role-playing, what was a certain type of behavior. So we published guidelines and strictures and rules because it was so new. It was so foreign, even to the other gamers who were picking it up as a new form of gaming. And they were just alignments were really catechism guidelines. All right. Now, are they always irrelevant? Not always. Particularly in the case of clerics. If you play clerics like I do, you don't make anybody pick a particular god and figure out their pantheon and all their rites and rituals and all that. You're just a basic cleric, and basically have a neutral good nature or whatever. Then you're assumed to have somebody that you can worship in a neutral good fashion. Where it gets sticky, and where alignment should and does have a big effect, is if you've declared your neutral good and you start doing some, you slide over into little neutral, which is, every man for himself and etc. Well, that's one thing. And as a DM, you can decide how you want to handle that. If their behavior is such that it would go against what their professed alignment is, and this is an alignment that they have professed to accept in order to worship whatever, well then, if they start violating it, I'm not just talking about fudging a little, but you can do the same thing, just a different degree, stuff starts happening. They don't cure up as fast. Now, if you're in a game where you pay each other for cures and stuff like that, well, a couple of cures that didn't do all that good are going to ruin your trade, and or have somebody bigger and stronger than you kicked off and accusing you of fraud or trickery or whatever. When something just, when you do something awful that's totally out of the moral precepts set down by the, we'll call it a generic pantheon that you worship, if you're grotesquely out of alignment, then bad stuff's going to start happening to you. You're not going to be able to heal. You're not going to be able to do things. Now, I handle clerics and spells, which I could use as prayer. I do it differently. But according to canon, that's where clerics that don't behave get into trouble. Now, it can also, if you choose, spill down into fighters and magic users. The magic users don't tend to be terribly religious types, unless it's, worshiping demons and trucking with devils and stuff. Fighters, if you want to use alignment in your campaign, then when people aren't behaving as their alignment would dictate, more bad things can happen to them. The bad things that happen to them can happen worse. There's a lot of ways, if you choose to go that route. I've always been a little squeamish about delving too far into various religions, as I'm somewhat of a agnostic deist of sorts, so I've never delved into it too far. But that's something that you would decide yourself, and how you want your campaign to evolve over a period of time. It can be used to draw players back to where they're supposed to be. If you're self-professed neutral good band of merry adventures, starts torturing baby goblins or whatever, well, yeah, then their karma should start sucking. They should have a greater difficulty making their saving throws. Therefore, their saving throws are more difficult. There's they can start taking extra damage. Lots of things you can do if you want it. And yeah, it's kind of selective to only really pay attention to it with clerics. But hey, clerics are the only ones that are, claiming to channel godlike godlike powers through favors from whatever deity they worship. So, yeah, okay. I think that's it. I've run out of things to say. Jim and I are going to do a live stream the Friday that we come back from TotalCon. So, if I had a February calendar here, I'd tell you when that was, but I'll tell you next time. Dodata Gobi.
Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. DSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.